Thank you so much, Mayor, for coming on the show today. Appreciate you taking the time. Know you're super busy. For those who don't know you, you're the mayor of Miami. You've become super popular lately, especially on Twitter, as really the most tech-friendly mayor in the world. You're recruiting not just companies, but individual investors and entrepreneurs as well. But before you were popular in tech and on Twitter, you were very popular in Miami. So you ran for mayor and got 86% of the vote from Miami residents. How did you go about, when you initially ran for mayor? How did you become so popular among, the people that you now serve as mayor?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you. It's interesting. Sometimes in life, people, there's a saying in some of our churches, they see the glory, but they don't know the real story. And part of the issue is sometimes you don't realize you got to go backwards to go forwards. And for me, it actually starts with an attempt in 2013 to unseat an incumbent. I thought, I was a next generation candidate, and I thought, I could, with the energy and my and what I felt was my ability, could create a tectonic shift in Miami politics. And so I ran in 2013 and was unsuccessful. I ended up getting out of that race, stayed as a councilman, and then when I ran in 2017, I went from being an underdog to being inevitable. And so I think, what's interesting is people will focus on the win of 86%, which is phenomenal, right? And it's something that's hard to do under the best of circumstances. But they actually have to look back a little further and understand that before there was that great success, there was a failure that I learned from that allowed me to be able to be in a situation where I could garner that kind of support. I think the second part of it is, look, I've always considered myself as someone who is a collaborator. I try to be as nonpartisan as possible. It's very hard to get 86% of the vote anywhere if you are hyper partisan, or if you're seen that way. And I try to pierce that by focusing on solutions to problems instead of parties. So that's been my formula, and it's worked well for me.
That's awesome, and I myself wasn't aware of the earlier run, and I
Yep.
thought I did a good job prepping, but I missed that piece. So it's pretty interesting to hear. And you talk about like being an underdog, going from an underdog to inevitable. It's a really cool way to put it. I personally am a big believer in persistence, and any failure is just one failure closer to success.
Yep. Agree.
Understand you had a very interesting childhood, growing up as the son of the mayor. Your
Yep.
dad was the first Cuban mayor of Miami. Now you're the first Miami-born mayor of Miami. What was it like growing up with your dad as the mayor, and how did maybe persistence, maybe some other values and aspects of your character drive you to kind of follow in his footsteps and now not just become the mayor of Miami, but try to really transform Miami and evolve Miami beyond what your dad and those before you left it?
Yeah, first, again, you have to sort of go back to go forward. Again, my dad was the first Cuban-born mayor. I'm actually the first Miami-born mayor, the first mayor of Miami that was born in the city in a 125-year history of the city, the entirety of the city. So, and we're the first father and son mayor. So those are interesting sort of watershed events in our city's history. But you really got to go back to my dad's upbringing. My dad is the ninth of 14 kids. He emigrated from Cuba in the 1960s at 12 years old. Ended up in DC, learned the language. So it's a classic immigrant story. Got a full scholarship to college, got 2 graduate degrees from Harvard, and came to Miami and ran for office, and ultimately became the first Cuban mayor in 1985 to 1993. I was 8 years old when that happened. And so it was a very, very weird upbringing to be the mayor's son at sort of that adolescent time in your life. It's a hard way to create an identity for yourself. So I had to find a way over time to create my own identity. Obviously preserving the legacy that my father created, and respecting his legacy and his advice. And he later became an elected official at the county level. So I mean, it's all good. We have a great relationship, him and I. But I was very fortunate to see the ups and downs of what a political life is, the way people treat you when you're in office versus the way people treat you when you're not in office, which is a life lesson about sort of the fact that uh, you know, power, if you will, is fleeting, and you're gonna have people that respond to you when you're in a position of authority, and then you have your what I call your real friends, which are the people that are going to be by your side having a beer with you when all the lights go off. So that I've sort of witnessed and experienced, and I think it helps me. It gives me a lot of perspective, and it has guided me in that, my father believed in the future of the city, and I am a big believer and am bullish. And I wouldn't have done this, got on this sort of tweet marathon on tech, if it's not something that I felt, number one, I've been working for 10 years to get to this point. And number two, I'm doing it not only for myself and my generation, but for my children and my unborn grandchildren, understanding that every city in America and every city on the planet will ultimately be competing to grow its tech ecosystem. Anyone that is not doing that is being negligent, as it relates to its own population. So for me, it was really kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, I totally agree that tech, it's driving everything and it's creating a lot of jobs and a lot of value and a lot of great companies, and any city or country or state that's ignoring it is probably doing themselves a disservice. Let's talk
Yep.
about the tweet marathon that you mentioned. And I'll use your words. We'll go back a little bit to talk about where we are now and where we'll be going forward. Uh, from my perspective, it started. Delian from Founders Fund tweeted, "Okay, guys, hear me out. What if we moved Silicon Valley to Miami?" And you responded very simply, "How can I help?" And that just went absolutely viral. Um, did you have any idea? I mean, what was the story behind that tweet, if there was one? Or, I imagine you didn't think too much of it when you actually sent it off. And then could you have at all envisioned what it would become? And, you mentioned 10 years kind of in the waiting, but did you have any idea that that would trigger this blitz effort to bring Miami up to speed as kind of the next Silicon Valley or the next tech hub of the country and possibly the world?
None whatsoever. I will embarrassed. I'll make some embarrassing admissions that I probably shouldn't make. One is I didn't know who Delian was, and I didn't even know what the Founders Fund was at the time. To me, the concept of creating a Silicon Valley in Miami is something that we've been working on for a decade, creating a foundation. And I didn't even realize, I always thought we were making great progress, and we are making great progress prior to the tweet and prior to all this activity. But I didn't really have a full grasp of how far we needed to go. I don't think I fully grasped it until that moment. And that moment set off what I call my PhD, right? In trying to create a tech ecosystem, understanding, opening my eyes to what really needed to happen, and what really, to create the real critical mass, and having people like Keith Rabois, who's been such a champion for Miami, Shervin Pishavar, who's been such a champion for Miami, and getting more and more people involved, Jack Dorsey, the Winklevoss twins, having Tyler and Cameron, having so many people express interest in the city. This sort of Bitcoin crypto revolution that we're in the midst of. So it just really accelerated. It was a moment of acceleration, and it accelerated my understanding, the profound interest and understanding of what it would take to get there. And I basically didn't stop. And the reason why I didn't stop is because it was so positive. And the how can I help tweet, it's really no different than what I do every day as a politician, as an elected official. I'm always asking people constantly, how can I help? And I think, unfortunately, in public service, A, people are usually not being helpful. And B, to the extent that they want to put all these preconditions, right? Like, oh, we'll help you, but you need to do this, you need to do that. And I wasn't putting any preconditions. All I was saying was, look, I understand that this industry has the ability to revolutionize our city. And we've been trying to make it happen. And I want to accelerate that. And I think the tweet has accelerated it by a 5 to 10 year margin. And I'm hoping that this moment continues and becomes a movement.
Yeah, I think you're doing an amazing job so far from the outside looking in. It was kind of all took me by surprise. I saw Keith announce that he was moving to Miami. I had him on the podcast previously. He's one of my favorite investors. I think one of the smartest investors in the world, and operators for that matter as well in tech. Mateo, I also had on the podcast from 8 Sleep. Pomp,
Mateo,
I know you spoke with, and he says hi, by the way. Pomp,
and his wife, great people. Pomp is amazing. And the beauty of it is it's not just, it's these power couples too, which is kind of fun for me, and having them at City Hall and doing these Cafecito Tech Talks where they come and they have coffee and we talk about, why Miami, what their Miami story is. And by the way, that tweet got 2.3 million impressions. And the tweets that followed over the last 28 days have gotten, I think at its high point was 27 million organic impressions. No, nothing paid. So it's really astonishing what getting activated in this space and trying to own the space and be authentic, what it's done for me and for the city.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane. You literally couldn't pay for, you could maybe pay for that many hits, but you couldn't pay for that type of virality and authenticity and the reception that it's received. I mean, you could spend billions of dollars and you wouldn't have the same genuine impact that I think something that naturally out of kind of goodwill gets
Yep.
picked up and popular
Absolutely.
creates. You mentioned Keith and Shervin, and I was mentioning a few others who I've talked to who are moving down to Miami now. What's it been like having, what are you seeing as the benefits of having someone like Keith being the champion of Miami and kind of aiming, alongside you, being the mayor as someone who's now just
Yeah.
a citizen and resident helping lead the charge?
I think it's critical because I need validation, right? I mean, a mayor is supposed to advocate for his or her city, right? That's like what a mayor does. And then having people like him and Shervin, go out there on Twitter and not only protect me when people come after me, but it creates this critical mass, and there's just so many people, and it really creates a tremendous amount of credibility and validation. He's, like you said, he's not only one of the smartest investors in the world, he could be one of the smartest people in the world. It's great to have someone like him in our city championing us.
Great. So I do want to talk about kind of your vision. You talk about how Miami historically has been an intellectual talent exporter, and you guys are
Yep.
aiming now to be a net importer. What are
Yep.
some of, and obviously some of these people are helping, but ultimately you're the mayor and you're driving a lot of this vision. What
Sure.
are some of the things that you can do or that you've identified being able to do directly? I know there's certain things that just aren't in your control, and what you're doing in
Sure.
terms of being just so supportive to the various types of companies and individuals that are looking to relocate or would consider or be open to relocating to Miami. That's huge, and I don't want to take anything away from that. That would be enough. But is there anything else policy wise that you've identified as like some of the biggest ticket items that you could do?
Well, I mean, in terms of creating an ecosystem or accelerating the creation of an ecosystem, one of the things that I've been doing is identifying what are the weak spots. And I think part of some of the weak spots are legal in nature, right? Like we're looking at Wyoming's crypto laws to make sure that we're as proactive and as welcoming to crypto as Wyoming is. We're looking at incentives from places like Austin to make sure that we're competitive on incentives. So we want to be competitive. I think we want to be honest with ourselves and make sure that our educational system is up to par. And so that's going to be a process where we're reflecting and also potentially inviting top tier educational institutions to have satellite offices here. What we want is people to be able to get educated here and then stay here. What was happening when I was 20 years old is, a lot of people went to Ivy League schools and then stayed in those areas in Boston and New York and Washington. If you're doing politics in LA, if you're going, in Palo Alto and in Silicon Valley, if you're going to do tech. So we want to change that narrative.
So recently, some of the big hits outside of tech, there's also been some movement of financial institutions, Blackstone, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase,
Yep.
Citadel. You guys aren't just aiming to be the tech hub, right? You're aiming to be just a huge, big new city for talent of all types. Can you talk a little bit about like your vision for Miami? Obviously, tech is an important component, but the future, Miami in 5 years, Miami in 10 years,
Yeah.
what does that look like to you?
It looks like it's going to be the most important city in the United States, hopefully, and potentially one of the most important cities on the planet. I think what you're talking about is an aggregation of a tremendous amount of capital, right? Not just in terms of tech, but in terms of investment and in terms of businesses. And I think the more intellectual capital you congregate in a particular place with the more actual capital, the more propensity for growth. I mean, that's just a sort of simple math. So I think as these phenomenon continue to occur in terms of the companies that are choosing to move here, you're going to see it is going to be an exponential growth because again, the more of these things that you have, the faster they will grow. So I think Miami is going to catapult itself. I think the tweet has created sort of a watershed, lightning in a bottle type of moment that I think has also acted as an accelerator. So and now I realize the power of just getting the message out, right? I think one of the things that I did in my conversations with my mayor's tech working group is that I realized that we had probably some assets that we weren't talking about and that we didn't know. For example, we have the most African American Hispanic engineers in the country, right? Most people didn't know that. So a part of it is just telling our story. And I think the second part is making people feel comfortable that now is the time to make that move, that they're not taking any additional risk by moving to Miami.
Yeah, so you mentioned some of the attractors. Obviously, Miami has a number of benefits. People probably are most familiar with the weather. Less people, but also a lot of people understand that there's advantages in the tax laws. Can you talk about some of like, what are the few things that you name up front when you talk about selling people on Miami? And I know it's been a fairly easy sell for you as of late, but would love to kind of hear the pitch.
Well, the pitch is you've identified some of it. Part of it is of course, our weather. Part of it, I think, is our internationality, the fact that we're very well geo-positioned geographically to have direct flights to Europe, Asia, the Middle East, South America, and the United States. So if you're looking for a city that's international, there's no better city in America than Miami. Then then you go over the tax question, and when you were considering cities that had a huge cost differential with Miami, New York, LA. So where Miami is inexpensive is a lot less expensive to buy a much nicer property. Then you consider the fact that we have no state income tax, we have no local income tax. And then those used to be deductible from the federal income taxes, and they're no longer deductible from the federal income taxes. So it just becomes this mountain of reasons. And I think we've reached that tipping point where, listen, it's hard to uproot. It's hard to change. It's hard to move. Nobody wants to, have their kids come out of school and go and start over. But when you put it all together, it just becomes an avalanche of reasons. And now that you have the critical mass, which I think was the last component, now it makes it easy because now you're not taking a big risk. Before, if you were one of the first arrivals, it's like, oh, wait a second, I'm going to Miami. People are like, wait, well, is Miami really established? Is it ready? And now I think every day that goes by, where the more Keith voices that we have, the more voices like that, the more people believe that it's not only not risky, it's probably the least risky thing you can do, and probably the most beneficial thing that you should do, which is to move.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. I see it as like kind of the combination of two factors. So the first is what you mentioned, once you have critical mass and kind of the flywheel effect starts to take hold, it becomes a hell of a lot easier to get a lot of people on board and a lot of people moving. The second factor is that your timing is, maybe good in that sense, but also somewhat historic in that we've had obviously a very unusual year with COVID.
Yep.
And what it's done is made a lot of companies remote only or remote first, at
Yep.
least for the foreseeable future. And so you have people who no longer are really tied to wherever they are and are much more willing to move. I myself have been staying in kind of Airbnbs for a good portion of the year and just traveling around and seeing different cities. It's a very interesting dynamic that I think is going to encourage cities like yours to compete for citizens in a way that they haven't really done in the past, because it was a lot harder to move out of cities, a lot harder to move into new cities. And now that's kind of, it's a brand new ball game, and you're the first mayor and really the first politician, even at the state level, to be so kind of forward in recruiting, again, not just companies, but individuals with a lot of influence in a world where individual influencers make a ton of difference. So it's really exciting to watch. Are you seeing, that type of that second trend that I talked about take full, where people are hopefully you're not seeing too many people, less friction on leaving, but you're seeing a lot of people who are just super willing to relocate or come move down there for a month and stay in an Airbnb or something like that?
We absolutely are seeing it, and we're encouraging it, and we're actually trying to get companies actively to promote it, because we feel that once people get down here, I've heard so many stories of people that said, I came down for a weekend turned into a week turned into a month, and now I'm buying a place. So we actually feel that that landscape is very favorable to the city. And what we're trying to do is convince big companies, there's a lot of different ways, to achieve the goal, right? One of them, of course, is to continue to get and pitch, and we'll always do that, a big anchor tenants, if you will, right? Tech tenants. But the other one is to say, listen, send me 500 of your engineers to work remotely from Miami, and that also helps create more critical mass of talent. And so I think absolutely that's something we're looking at. We're looking at non-competes as something that maybe we will make a suggestion to the state to reform based on best practices. So listen, we're looking at everything that we can look at to be as competitive as possible and make it as easy as possible for people to move here.
Yeah, that's great. And I know that, Miami, to your point, it's not like this is all brand new overnight. While it might have gone kind of viral and it might have leveled up by and accelerated by like 5 or 10 years, you guys have been focused on making Miami to some degree a tech hub for years. And you already have companies. I think Twitter has a good deal of employees in
Yes,
Miami,
they do. They do.
some other companies as well. And, I saw in 2017, I think it was the Kauffman Foundation recognized you guys as the #1 city for startups, and that was passing Austin. And they found that you guys had more entrepreneurs per capita than any other metro in the States. So that's something that like I would have had no idea about if not for preparing for this interview. And Miami now everyone's aware, but you guys have kind of built the foundation over the years. One of the problems that I found from that Kauffman report was that while you guys are the #1 city for startups, the issue has been that there hasn't been a lot of success, or at least there's
Yeah.
room for improvement
Yeah.
in scaling
Yep.
and growth. How do you plan to kind of help? Obviously, again, it's not up to you or in your
Sure.
control. I totally appreciate that. But what are some things that you can do to help Miami kind of go to that next stage where you don't just
Sure.
have startups, but you have the next, batch of really successful companies growing and scaling?
Yeah, I think there's two things. I think one is the part of the reason why we are so entrepreneurial is because we're very much an immigrant community. A lot of Hispanic immigration communities that are here, but a lot of them own, family-owned businesses where they make money, they do well. They probably are in high income tax brackets, but they see no reason why they must grow into a global company or a national company, right? So that entrepreneurial spirit's there to create, to take risk, to create companies and to succeed. It's just not thought of as something. Hey, I'm going to create a bakery that's going to be franchised in the whole United States, right? So, or whatever the business is, dry cleaning store or whatever, anything. So I think that's part of it, and there's certainly a professional culture in terms of people wanting to be doctors and lawyers and accountants. But I think the second part of it is that you really didn't have that kind of VC money that would be necessary to fuel and to give the gasoline for companies that are starting up to scale up. So I think that's part of it, and I think the third part of it we've already talked about, which is a lot of that intellectual talent of people that would have been scaling is probably Miami created talent in terms of they were born here, they went to high school here, and they left to some Ivy League school, and they are scaling up in other parts of the country. So part of it is just getting those people back to Miami.
Right. And that all makes sense. I want to go back and talk about some, you mentioned, Pomp, obviously, and the Winklevosses, and you've brought up Bitcoin and crypto a couple of times, said that you were
Yep.
looking to Wyoming and talking with them as they're kind of the most crypto friendly state right now. Being a tech hub is obviously hugely important, but even just being a crypto hub in the United States would be phenomenal from my perspective for a phenomenal addition of talent for Miami. Arguably, there's no group of people, in terms of coders and engineers that's kind of more at the cutting edge in the world right now, and it's very much a global movement which could attract global talent. Um, I saw that you were reading like the Winklevoss's book. I saw Pomp tweeted, potential about you guys, integrating Bitcoin into the states, into the city system a little bit. What's your current understanding of Bitcoin? And, just for some background, this is something like I've had a lot of crypto related people on the podcast, and Bitcoin is something that I've spent a lot of time studying and understanding. And I think it's an incredible technology. So would love to hear,
Yeah,
understand you might just be getting started, but would love to hear your
sure.
perspective.
So I'm sure you know a lot more about it than I do. I think the concept of creating essentially a currency which has a decentralized authentication system, essentially, which and it has a finite amount of that quote unquote currency, so that you don't have government intervention for money supply issues and things of that nature. I think it's a fascinating concept, right? And I think that as far as so far, Bitcoin has, and there are probably other cryptos that have achieved this, right? They have shown themselves to be impenetrable so far in terms of real hacking. They've been accessible and available to be exchanged, and there's a certain amount of liquidity. They're very liquid so far, and they've managed the regulatory environment, I would say, fairly well. Given the fact that, I mean that fairly well, and that they haven't been squashed, right, by any sort of regulatory agency. So I consider that a win. And I do think that they're becoming more and more mainstream. So I don't know, where does that put me, you think, in terms of my explanation, in terms of 0 to 10, in terms of understanding of what it's about?
No, I mean, I don't want to number grade the mayor on his knowledge of Bitcoin,
Okay.
but it was definitely good and the best I've heard from a politician, if I can say that much.
Okay, cool.
Um,
I'll take that. I'll take that. But I think for me, since I believe in the concept, and I believe and I shouldn't say the concept. It's not a concept. It's reality. Since I believe in it, I do think that I want to particularly focus this year on doing some more integration stuff, like being able to make payments to government, like taxes or fees and things of that nature. So that's what I want to focus on this year. In terms of investment, which is what Pomp talked about, we have to look at what our investment portfolio is. Our biggest issue is that we have risk tolerances in terms of what we can invest in. It's not the actual investment itself, whether the investment was a commodity or whether the investment was a currency or whatever the investment is. It's about risk tolerances. So I've got to look at whether we have a percentage or an ability to put a percentage of our money in something that has the level of risk tolerance that Bitcoin has, just by virtue of its newness. But it's funny because I put out I sort of quoted something that Pomp said in I think it was a CNBC interview where he talked about Bitcoin being a very stable investment in an unstable year. And I got a lot of people that sort of tweeted at me and called me and texted me and say, "Hey, you can't say that Bitcoin is stable." And I said, "Well, first of all, I qualified it by this year, right? Which is already a known year. So I can look back and say that this year was stable in the sense that it performed well in comparison to all the other markets in a year that was very unstable. And so even then, I got people arguing with me, well, stability is not about growth; it's about the volatility, right? So even growth can be volatile. So we got into big arguments and discussions about that. But I think Bitcoin is here to stay. I think cryptos are here to stay, and I think they are going to be more and more mainstream as time goes on. So I'm bullish on that.
it's very cool to talk with you about this, and I have to give my 2 cents a little bit. I think, going back to what you said about Miami, that it's been attractive for tech for a while, but you need to have kind of the critical mass for people to start coming, and then the effect just, network effects, it starts to grow where people are more comfortable coming because there's more people there, and then the more people there, more people are comfortable coming, etc. Bitcoin, has come to fruition from that very same effect, people believing, and then the price going up, and then people seeing the price going up and more people believing, et cetera, et cetera. And what I think is interesting for you, if I can just say one quick thing, is that you have companies like, I don't know, you mentioned Jack Dorsey earlier. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
talked with him about like Bitcoin specifically, but they at his company Square put, I think, 1% of their balance sheet in Bitcoin. Other companies have been more aggressive and put their entire balance sheet in Bitcoin. What I think would be interesting, I totally appreciate you have this risk, to manage with your portfolio, but even if you could just put 1% or even less than that, whatever, say Bitcoin is viewed as 100% risky investment, which probably
Right.
it's not. But if it was, which is, fair,
Right.
then if there's this very small percentage that shouldn't really affect the risk of the
Right.
overall portfolio, and it can actually grow quite large. And the reason I bring the network effect up is because, other cities may see Miami as kind of the first city to formally do that and very publicly do that. Obviously, you're becoming a very public figure, and then they'll follow, and it'll kind of be a self-fulfilling prophecy that the amount that you put into Bitcoin will then appreciate because other cities have seen Miami do it and might follow suit. So
I totally get that. And that's, by the way, Pomp made the exact same argument, and it's a good argument. Basically he's like, look, pick a number that you could like lose completely, and use that number, because the signaling effect, like you said, of the city doing it and being a first adopter would be so significant that it diminishes, or if not completely eliminates, the possibility that it will actually be a losing bet, right? But and I don't think it would be a losing bet, by the way. It's more of an issue of just, you don't have, a bunch of Francis Suarez's my age running around in our government, or in government generally. So just think of that, and the other people that I have to convince, because I don't do things by executive fiat, right? I have to do things through consultation, through collaboration. So I have to sometimes convince people that are, my father's age, to go along with me. And there are things about Bitcoin that I think, there are reputational things that I think they've done a great job over time of dealing with, but those things linger in the minds of some people. And so, I think we all collectively have to do a good job of making sure that we can push forward. Because I do think that breaking those barriers of legitimacy and breaking those barriers of mainstreaming is incredibly important for Bitcoin's continued growth.
yeah, and I totally appreciate your point. And I'm not trying to make it seem like it would be a trivial effort by any means.
No, I
But
know,
I
I know,
think,
I know, I know you get it. I know you get it.
yeah, yeah, and I think that, just to conclude on the subject, I think, like you said, when you tweeted at Delian, you didn't even know really what you were getting yourself into, and it ended up being kind of the catalyst for a lot of this. I think that getting, whatever it is, 0.1% into Bitcoin, or whatever it might be, would be one of those things that might seem like just one of a number of actions, but could actually end up being like the thing that helps a lot of momentum. So
I
it's
agree.
interesting, and I really, it's super cool to hear your perspective, and obviously you've been reading up on it and everything like that. So super
And I'm going
interesting
to
to
keep
hear.
reading on it, by the way. That's just the first of two or three books that I'm going to read on it, because I want to know a little bit more about the nuts and bolts and have a pretty good sense of it, because I have been, I've been reading about it over time. But yeah, I'm a believer.
Yeah, I'll send you something I wrote about it if you're interested. Obviously, a lot of
Sure.
great people are writing, but I take a very fundamental approach and try to be really reasonable about
Yeah, I
it.
would love to read it. I would
Yeah, so
absolutely love.
so I'll send that your way. I want to talk a little bit, moving away from the growth of Miami and the tech focused stuff, which is all super interesting and was, fascinating to hear your take on a lot of those questions I had. But I want to talk a little bit about more, we have like 5 or 10 minutes left, just, more traditional politics outside of this last month or so. So one exciting, thing for you, I heard, is that you're going to be the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors in 2022. So, congratulations on that. First of all, what does that mean to you?
It's incredibly important. I mean, it means that my colleagues, all the mayors of the United States, Republicans and Democrats, have decided that I am the right person to lead all the mayors of the United States for the year 2022. There's going to be an announcement tomorrow. I don't know when this podcast is actually being published, but that will sort of extend that. So it'll be interesting to see, and that's what I've been told. So we'll see how that all plays out. But the point is that it's just an incredible opportunity to have a national voice of mayors, as opposed to just being the mayor of a city. And I think it's something that's going to be exciting, and it's going to give me a platform for everything that I'm doing in technology and Bitcoin and blockchain. It will give me that a platform to talk about these things on a national level.
Right. So I've got a few more questions if if that's all right. The first is, you also added a civility pledge to the oath of office for newly elected officials, I understand. Why did you do that? Why was that important to you? What's the importance of having more civility in politics than we're seeing today?
You did do your research. You did do your research. That's good. Um, again, going back to how I got elected by 86%, I think civility is a lost art in public discourse. I think if we treat each other with integrity, um, I think we can disagree on things without being disagreeable. We can disagree intensely on things. We can disagree passionately about things. We can take the opposite position, and it should never be personal. It should never be personalized. And I think that's something that's been lost in politics. And I think part of the reason why being an elected official has lost its sort of nobility is because we've forgotten uh, how important it is for us to treat each other civilly. By the way, that's not just something that politicians should do. It's people, we should do that in our everyday, in the way we treat and interact with people on a daily basis. But I think certainly when you're in a public position, it becomes even more important because everybody's looking to you, and everyone is analyzing everything you do and say and scrutinizing it. So I think your actions have to be held at an even higher standard. So to me, the reason why we did it is because I think that, you know, besides being on the blue team or the red team, what's most important, I think, in a politician is that they're a good person, that there's someone that cares, that there's someone that obviously acts with integrity, but that also treats other people kindly. And I think part of the reason why I asked, how can I help? Is because to me, that's the fundamental question that we should always ask each other, right? I think the Miami community now needs to ask me, how can they help me? Because I'm overwhelmed, in my DMs and, in the interest of podcasts and people that want to talk about this. So I'm going to need help. And that's, and that's important too.
Yeah, so you talked about, not being too far on either side of in terms of party lines, and taking a very bipartisan approach. I know, technically you're a Republican, but correct me if I'm wrong. That's not you couldn't just like look up the Republican playbook and set of policy kind of perspectives, and that wouldn't necessarily align directly with you. You take an independent view and think for yourself and come to your own conclusions with more of a problem solving mindset, like you talked about. I do want to, wrap up with one issue that's a tough issue, but I'd like to hear your perspective because, you have a Cuban heritage, but you're a Republican. I think immigration is something that,
Yeah.
people talk a lot about, and people tend to get on both sides of the argument very, passionate about and extreme about. And I understand some people have certain backgrounds, but from my perspective, there's just briefly like, US is obviously built by immigrants, and immigrants have played a fundamental America wouldn't be what America is at all without immigrants, and there's no denying that. There's no reasonable way to deny that. At the same time, those people who are overly sympathetic from my perspective to illegal immigrants, for example, I think there's a reason we have policy, and there's a reason that there's a legal process to immigrate to the United States. And, we might be able to change that policy and change some of the laws, but it's not as easy as saying, like, let everyone who wants to come, or don't let anyone in. There's actually probably an answer in the middle.
Sure.
And you strike me as someone who's kind of a middle-minded person,
Yeah.
and with your background, a family that immigrated to the U.S. very recently, and also kind of understanding maybe the Republican perspective.
Yeah.
As a Republican, would love to hear kind of your thoughts on the issue at a national level.
Yeah. It's one that, I struggle with certain arguments that people make on it. And to me, it really shouldn't be, it really shouldn't be a fundamentally difficult issue. I think if you want to be an American, and what, like you said, what's great about this country is we are a country of immigrants. So we have to start there. I mean, if for example, the laws were such that when my parents came, they would not have been able to come for whatever reason, then I may not be an American. I may not have been the mayor, and who knows what I may not be in the future. So there was a process and a legal framework for me to be able to become a US citizen. How has that legal framework adapted over time? I think in some ways it's adapted unfairly for certain people over others. And I'll give you, we were one of the privileged groups, right? If you were Cuban, there was in the Cuban Adjustment Act, wet foot, dry foot. If you were Cuban and you touched American soil, you were automatically eligible for political asylum, and you were automatically eligible to become a citizen. And so we benefited from that for decades in the United States, but nobody else did. Not if you were Mexican, not if you were Haitian. So that to me it always sort of it bothered me, as someone who feels like there's someone who should be who wants to pursue fairness, right? So I think the problem is that our system is somewhat broken. But I think if you are a law-abiding person that wants to pay taxes, that has the ability to get a job in this country, because right now, or pre-COVID, we were at full employment. Uh, some would argue we were at hyper full employment. And there's no national security reason why, we can't deny your entry. Then you should have the ability to potentially become a U.S. citizen under our legal immigration laws, right? And so I think part of the problem is that it's like so many problems in our country. They become hyper politicized. I mean, COVID, for God's sakes, which is a pandemic, has become hyper politicized. You know what I mean? And so we have to get away from hyper politicizing these issues, and we have to start looking at these issues as problems that need to be solved. And if we look at it as a problem that needs to be solved, and we have some fundamental guiding principles, some of the ones you articulated, some of the ones I'm trying to articulate, I think we can find a common ground and come to a solution where we can have a legal immigration system that is respected and that is good for the country, is healthy for the country. I don't think it's that difficult. I think what makes it difficult is that there's an artificial construct that if you're on the red team, you must think this way, this way, this way, and this way, and you must vote this way, this way, this way, and this way on the issue. And if you're on the blue team, then you must think and vote this way, this way, this way on the issue. And I think if we could just take that one issue and say, hey, this is one issue, we're not going to make it partisan. We're not going to do a red team, blue team thing. We're going to do an experiment. We're just going to look at it as a problem that we need to solve. And we're going to reflect on our own, how we got here as citizens and what makes this country great, like you said. And you look at tech as a great example. Tech is an industry that is completely dominated by immigrants. But for, having a healthy immigration system over a long period of time, we wouldn't have a lot of these innovators and these creative minds, people who are very entrepreneurial, people who are salt of the earth, who really want to do well. So, I don't know if I've given you a good answer or I've given you a political answer, but I feel like that's where I'm at. And I really don't think that it would be that difficult to solve if we looked at it from the perspective that I look at it.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, and I don't think it was overly political by any means. It was very reasonable from my perspective, and people don't have to agree, but I think that taking a balanced approach and acknowledging pros and cons is kind of the first step towards improving a lot of these issues that we're dealing with today. Mayor, I want to thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Love following what you're doing in Miami. Might be due for a visit myself soon.
Gotta come, man. Come on. Yeah. It's part of the Miami story. Let's do it.
Yeah. So, again, appreciate the time and can't wait to see what's next. Where can people follow this story, follow you on Twitter, see what's next for Miami and for you?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Francis Suarez and at Miami Mayor. Those are two Twitter handles that I have. One of them is my personal. The other one is my public. The at Francis Suarez one is the one that I've been tweeting from. So that one, you can follow both of them. And then at Mayor of Miami is my Instagram handle. So you can follow me there. We do a lot of stuff on there and the live stuff. We're going to be doing some live stuff from Twitter as well. And then I'm in LinkedIn and obviously join Clubhouse and on Facebook as well.
Very cool. Well, you're taking the world by storm, and I'm rooting for you from afar. So thank you again, and looking forward to what's next.
You got it. Likewise. Hope you're along for the ride.